Okay, today is lesson 26, and we are going to be decomposing whole number fractions greater than 1 using whole number equivalents with various models. So, it's a lot of words, but bear with me. Okay, so let's first look at this image. We looked at this a few days ago. So, we have two halves in the middle of our number bond, and we have 4/4 around it. And we talked about 2 halves equals 1 whole. And what's cool is that 2/4 equals 1/2. So 2/4 equals 1/2, and 4/4 equals 1 whole. So now what we want to do is we want to add 2 more halves to the center. So another half and another half. And I'm going to show you 2 different ways that we can represent this. So the first way is I just add all the fourths. So, like we said, for every half, I get 2/4, right? So here's a half, here's a half, here's a half, and here's a half. And I know that 1/2, 2 halves, 3 halves, 4 halves is the same as 2 wholes, so that would be just like if I had 2 wholes. And then I know that I need to count up to 2 wholes for fourths. So 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4, 5/4, 6/4, 7/4, 8/4, because 8/4 also equals 2 wholes. Okay, so there's 2 ways I can represent this. The first is this way, where I just add all the fourths, so I have 8/4. The second way, which saves you some time, is I add 4/4 and 4/4, because if I have 2 wholes or 4 halves, for each whole I can add 4/4, because 4/4 equals 1 whole. And then, since I have 2 wholes, I can add another 4/4. So that's what we're going to be doing today, because we're going to be looking at different whole numbers and breaking them apart based on that fraction. So let's actually put this on a number line. So if I have my number line and I want to go from 0 to 2, I'm going to need to cut each whole into fourths. So I have 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4, and then another 4/4. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4. So now I have 4/4 and 4/4. And if I put that on my number line, I would have 0/4, 4/4, 8/4. And every whole number, I add another 4/4. Okay, and if I added another 4/4, then I would change this and add another 4/4. Okay. Now, if I only had 1 whole, I could represent it with 1/4 all around, or I could represent it as 4/4, which is what we're going to be doing today. So let's look at our problem set where we're going to practice. Okay, let's start with halves. So right here, I'm going to start by cutting my number line into halves. So if I'm doing halves, I need to cut 2 equal pieces, which means I only have to draw 1 line for each whole. So I'm going to label it just because it's easier for me to see. So 0 halves, 1 half, 2 halves, 3 halves, 4 halves. So if I'm at 0, I have 0 halves. So I could put a 0 here. If I'm at 1, like I said, there's 2 halves in one whole. So I have 1 equals 2 halves. And on my number bond, I'm going to add 2 halves. Now, if I have 2 wholes, I went from 2 halves and I added another 2 halves. So I now have 4 halves. So 2 equals 2 halves, which is 1 whole, plus another 2 halves. So now I have 2 wholes. Let's try it with thirds. Okay, so I'm cutting my thirds into 3 equal pieces. So I have to draw 2 lines for each whole. And this is starting at 2 whole numbers. So I'm going to extend this as if it went to 0 and 1. I know it's smaller, but that's okay, just for checking. So here I have 0 thirds, 3 thirds, 4 thirds, 5 thirds, 6 thirds. Because every time I have a whole, I have 3 thirds. So 1 whole, 2 whole. And if I add this up, 2 equals 6 thirds. Then I keep going. 7 thirds, 8 thirds, 9 thirds. Because now with 3 wholes, I'm adding 3 thirds plus 3 thirds plus 3 thirds. So 3, 6, 9 thirds. And 9, 10, 11, 12. So now I have 12 thirds. And I know this because I now have 4 wholes. So 3 thirds, 6, 9, 12. So I have 12 thirds. Okay. Now, here, it gives us a number line from 2 to 4, and it wants us to represent each of these fractions from 2 to 4. So, sevenths. I know that there are 7 sevenths in one whole. So if I'm doing 2 wholes, then I'm going to do 7 sevenths plus 7 sevenths, which equals 14 sevenths. 1 whole plus 1 whole equals 2 wholes. For 3 wholes, I'm going to take 14 sevenths and add another 7 sevenths, which equals 21 sevenths. And I can check this because 7 times 3 is 21, or 21 divided by 7 equals 3. Then I have 21 sevenths plus another whole, so 7 sevenths, and I now have 28 sevenths, and 28 divided by 7 is 4. Okay, let's do this for eighths. So I know that there are 8 eighths in one whole. So to find 2 wholes, I'm going to add 8 eighths plus 8 eighths, which equals 16 eighths. And 16 divided by 8 is 2. I'm going to write 2, 3, 4 here just to remind myself. Then I take 16 eighths and add 1 more whole, and I now have 24 eighths. And 24 divided by 8 is 3. Then I take 24 eighths, add another 8 eighths, and I now have 32 eighths, and 32 divided by 8 is 4. Okay, last one, tenths. So I know that 10 tenths equals 1 whole. So I'm going to start with 10 tenths plus 10 tenths, which equals 20 tenths. So that's 2 wholes. Take 20 tenths plus another whole equals 30 tenths, which equals 3. And finally, 30 tenths plus 1 more whole, which is 10 tenths, equals 40 tenths, which is the same as 4 wholes. And that is all for lesson 26.